for today, Friday, the 21st June 2024. When I went to school, I learned that this is the summer solstice. It's the longest day of the year, meaning it's a day when we'll have sunshine for longer hours than the other days. Yeah, when I have a look at this, I see some reports of it being yesterday, the 20th of June, but I don't know how that one comes about. This is the one I officially learned is the summer solstice. So I'll cling to that until some better information comes as to why they're talking about it for the 20th of June. Thank you so much for joining us here on the hotline. We know that you have choices. We're happy when you come here, happier when you find reasons to stay. This is the hotline.
Emily's views, her position on the issues, her point of view backed up by the facts. Here are Emily's views.
Yesterday, the Health Ministry held a press conference at which the Minister, Dr. Tufton, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry, Mr. Dunstan Bryan, the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jacqueline Besesa McKenzie, as well as Dr. Frey, I believe, was online from Cornwall Regional Hospital. This with a view to answering some questions posed by the opposition spokesman on health, Dr. Alfred Dawes. The information given by the minister about the functioning, the number of ventilators we have and the numbers now functioning, those that are out of commission and so forth. As you heard in our headlines a moment ago, shortly after those numbers were given at the press conference, there was a revision of those numbers. We'll come to the revision in just a moment, but let us hear the responses put out by the minister to the questions posed by Dr. Dawes. Firstly, Dr. Dawes called on the minister to report on the number of ventilators in Jamaica's public health system because he said what was given was fuzzy math, and he insisted that most of the life-saving machines donated during COVID have not been commissioned. According to a report by Kimon Francis, Dawes has been pressuring the Minister of Health to indicate to the country how many intensive care unit spaces are available and how many had the ventilators to accompany those spaces. He claimed as well that some of the ventilators donated remained in boxes or have been cannibalized, meaning you take out parts from one to put in another one so that it can function. So here is what Dr. Tufton presented to the nation yesterday.
I'm pleased and excited to say the outputs are significant.
Let's find the
used are outdated, but are on record or on file. So I just asked them to give us everything because of the public issue of it. But just to be clear, 118 are in active use and 40 at the time of the audit would be requiring some sort of servicing. And I also said that the 118 is more than adequate and represents the highest number of active use ventilators in the public health system. And I'm clear on that. So I hope that clears it up. Thank you.
It's part of the responses that came yesterday. Kimon Francis's article in the Gleaner today, they've been able to break out the numbers in the regional health authorities. And they tell us that 46% of ventilators in Southeast regional health authorities is non-operational. That's according to the minister's audit. They say of the 91 life-saving machines spread across KPH, Victoria Jubilee, and Princess Margaret, as well as Bustamante, all of these falling under Sarah, 49 are working, 42 are not. KPH, when I look back at see what Dr. Dawes said about KPH. Pointing to KPH, the main referral hospital in the country, Dawes said there are a maximum of 8 working ventilators. That's what Dawes said on Wednesday, carried in the newspaper on Thursday. Based on the calculation now by Kimon Francis of the Gleaner, Dr. Dawes is right with those numbers concerning KPH. This is how she puts it. KPH accounted for 31 of all operational ventilators within Sarah, and 23 of those are out of service. So 31 minus 23, that leaves 8 ventilators functioning at KPH, which is what Dr. Dawes said. It's a maximum of 8 working ventilators are at KPH. They say at Bustamante Hospital for Children, there are 8 working ventilators and 5 not working. Princess Margaret has 1 machine. Spanish Town has 23, of which 14 are non-operational. So only 9 functioning at Spanish Town Hospital. There's no ventilator at St. Joseph's Hospital. University Hospital of West Indies has 54. The majority of them, 29, are not working. So they only have 25 working ventilators now. Within the Northeast Regional Authority, 10 ventilators at St. Anne's Bay, 6 of which are operational. Annotto Bay, 4. Port Antonio, Port Maria Hospital, they don't have any. And this is what I can never understand. By the way, the Maypen Hospital in Clarendon has 1 ventilator, and according to Kimon Francis's article, it is used to transport patients between departments or to hospitals. I don't understand how and why we can have so many machines, maybe the most we've had in our history, and why such a large percentage of them are not functioning. I can understand the use is heavy, but this is part of the problem in the public sector. You don't seem to have a designated individual who is looking to ensure this particular machine has to be serviced within 3 weeks. So you need to take it out to service it to get it back up. These percentages where you have 31 and 23 are out of service, it is not good enough. And I think at some point in time, Minister said this yesterday, you have responsibility for policy, but you need to have people within the ministry who must have direct responsibility to ensure servicing of the machines that are given to us by various people out of the goodness of their heart, or that we as taxpayers pay for. I also understand from the chief medical officer that there are some hospitals where even though you may have the unit, because you're short-staffed, you don't have personnel there sufficient to operate them. And that is not something I'm prepared to chastise the Ministry of Health for. because there's a shortage of nurses worldwide. Almost every country is recruiting, and Jamaica becomes one of the key destinations from which nurses are recruited. So sometimes it doesn't even matter how much we pay, and there has been an increase in the salaries going, but we simply cannot compete with some of those larger countries. So I understand where the shortages now exist, and I do understand it's going to take a long time before we build the capacity back up to some respectable level. But this business where sometimes if it's not ventilator, you go into a room, the AC that is supposed to be kicking, it's just not pumping any good air. Who has responsibility for maintaining, and why don't people do what they're supposed to do? Then on the issue of the maternal, the deaths now, infant deaths and the death of mothers. The chief medical officer admitted that we are struggling in that area. And the impact of COVID is also evident in the numbers that we saw over the period. But there are a lot of questions still remaining there. You know, when I listened to the press conference yesterday and listened back to parts of it this morning, I'm in a state of uncertainty as to how we're going to properly address this. As I said yesterday, what else can a country do when you have people who, all of us are in our nooks and crannies? We eat whatever we want to eat. Most times we're not eating well. Everybody seems to think that fat is in. Everybody wants to be fluffy. Yeah? The more fluff you have is the more unhealthy you are. No preparation is made for the body to carry a baby. If government says it's going to cut out, it's going to ban sweet drink, there's an outcry. We've been encouraged to stay away from processed food, but somehow our people don't believe that the things that we grow are delicacies for us to eat. You get processed food, and that your video I put up on social media thinking you're eating well. The ground and the soil quality depleted over time as well, and we're not supplementing with the proper supplements. So we become pregnant. Our body's not ready for the pregnancy, and the deficiencies in our system are transmitted to the baby on the inside. Sometimes we don't turn up to the hospital for antenatal care until way into second trimester, if not time of delivery. And when you turn up, you have edema, swollen limbs, swollen feet. When you turn up, you have high blood pressure. And the system then has to find a way to help you. When if you'd shown up earlier, the chances of being helped and to be helped well, those chances would have increased. So what happens now when you turn up at the hospital in a sick body with a baby whose chances of survival have not completely, but they have been diminished? It reflects badly on the country. Because there are people out there taking the statistics for the death of the mother and the death of the baby. So really, how do we deal with this? People are hardly listening to proper sources of information these days. Everybody's in his own world. The woman is watching whatever she's engrossed in on TikTok, whatever social media platform. She's not looking at you. So whatever message you're putting out there, it's not likely it's going to reach her. But at the end of it all, the government gets blamed for an increase in maternal deaths or an increase in infant mortality. And I think we have to figure out exactly how are we going to do this. When we say to all of us women, we have to prepare our bodies to carry babies, to give the babies the best chance, to give ourselves the best chance. Who is listening? Here's what the chief medical officer had to say on this issue. Do you have that? We're coming up to that.
Thank you, Minister. So, just to put in context, we have just above 30,000 births each year, and the Sustainable Development Goal is that we try to achieve less than 70 maternal deaths per 100,000 live births per year. And the target is to get there by 2030. Now, Jamaica has not been doing so well where this is concerned. In 2019, we had a rate of 163.5 per 100,000, and in 2021, with COVID, we went up to 211 per 100,000. We know that we had associations with poor outcomes and pregnancy, and just like the rest of the world where the numbers in terms of maternal deaths increased, our numbers also increased as we had a number of antenatal patients who did suffer from COVID and had poor outcomes. And that resulted in that spike in our maternal mortality rate in 2021. Post-COVID, we are at the level in 2022 as we were in 2019 with 161 per 100,000. And then in 2023, our numbers have declined a bit. We're at about 130. So we are trying to get to the 70. We have put in several efforts in order to reduce the maternal mortality rate. I want to say, though, that the major causes of death in this group are hypertensive disorders of pregnancy and postpartum hemorrhage, bleeding after giving birth. Now, we have seen over the last couple of years that our incidence of non-communicable diseases have increased and continue to increase. And this affects our pregnant mothers just the same, because the number of mothers with chronic diseases are also increasing. And so therefore we have risky pregnancies. And so we have a risk to the mother and a risk to the child. And so in terms of antenatal care, it's very, very important for mothers to recognize, or persons who intend to become pregnant, to have children, to prepare themselves for pregnancy. We have focused for a long time on contraception and reduction in rates, but in terms of the mother's readiness to become pregnant, we have to focus on that to make sure that chronic diseases are controlled and that persons are physically well and mentally well in order to manage a pregnancy.
Absolutely. Yeah, You watch the growth of fast food and fat around us. You look at it. You walk on the street and look on the every other person that you see, and you take a note of what is going on. And based on these numbers that the permanent secretary gave, it appears to me that post-COVID, the graph is moving in the right direction, meaning we're having less maternal deaths, though we are nowhere near the 70 we have committed to based on our development goals by 2030, but we're heading in the right direction. Just coming to hand, somebody sent me this release from the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health says it takes note of what it's calling a misleading headline on the front page of the Gleaner today concerning ventilators in the public health system. The inclusion of obsolete equipment in the calculation of ventilators that are in the system is both misleading and inaccurate. So hopefully when Minister comes here, hopefully for On the Pulse today, he can clarify this for me. Because I think part of the problem, Ministry of Health, is that your numbers keep changing. I did hear the Chief Medical Officer saying it is almost difficult to give a number for the functioning ventilators because they change from, any given day. But this thing where you had a press conference and gave us 210, 118 working, and then you revise it by afternoon to say 191, 120 working, we need better clarity. So they say the ministry accounted for those ventilators which can no longer be used to give a full and transparent picture of what is on record. However, the ministry clearly distinguished between ventilators which may no longer be used as opposed to those which were sent for servicing or parts replacement. I don't want to be confused anymore by your numbers, ministry. So if you say the Gleaner headline is incorrect, when you come on, Minister, you clarify those things for me because it's something that can come with mathematical precision. Thank you, listeners. We're back with you on the hotline. I'm going to take some portions of this press conference. As I said to you, somebody sent to me a moment ago a release from the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health is saying the Gleaner's headline is misleading. And this headline says nearly half of the ventilators in the public system out of service, some hospitals without critical equipment. They say the inclusion of obsolete equipment in the calculation of ventilators that are in the system is both misleading and inaccurate. Obsolete. Let me go pull up this thing and see where obsolete ventilators come from. The ministry accounted for those ventilators which can no longer be used to give a full and transparent picture of what is on record. However, the ministry clearly distinguished between ventilators which may no longer be used as opposed to those which were sent for servicing or parts replacement. Outdated equipment such as beds or chairs which are in a permanent state of disrepair remain on file awaiting board certification for disposal, which is normally a lengthy process. A fair and more accurate conclusion by the Gleaner would be to say that at the time of the audit, fewer than a third of ventilators were found to be out of circulation, whether due to being sent for servicing or for parts replacement. These numbers are not unusual and would represent a more accurate depiction of the state of affairs. The Gleaner's subtitle, which states that half of the ventilators are dysfunctional, includes obsolete equipment, and it misrepresents the truth. It is worthy of note that the more than 100 ventilators being active at the time of audit represents the largest numbers in circulation in Jamaica. While this point was mentioned in the body of the article, it is clearly devalued by the misleading headline. Well, Minister, you come and let me understand some more about this obsolete business that you're talking about. Whatever the headline was supposed to be, you have too many now that are not functioning. Who has responsibility for maintenance? When are we going to get the thing right? Yeah, we have 100, which is more than we've ever had, but there was a moment when we needed them and when we had them as gifts. So why don't we try to keep as many of them as possible in operation? I want the minister to come and explain this. How did these numbers come to be inaccurate? I didn't do this breakdown that the Gleaner has done. Yeah, but I want the minister to come and tell me, or the chief medical officer, or whoever is responsible in the ministry to come and give this information. Let's hear a little bit more from the press conference there, Mrs. Fuller.
That audit has provided for us with specific data, all the ventilators that is in the public health system. Based on that audit, there are no ventilators that are missing. There are, therefore, should not be any speculation or indeed insinuation that somehow ventilators are not being utilized. And we will provide on our website just after this event a list of those ventilators and the appropriate serial numbers. And we went, and it took some time, we went beyond just identifying ventilators that are active, those that are being serviced or to be serviced, but also went to the extreme of even identifying those that are obsolete and are not being used anymore, because in the public system you have to store even the things that you're not using. There's a process, a long process of getting rid of those products. But I think in the interest of transparency, we went the full gamut because of the speculation surrounding the ventilators.
Oh, so he did mention there the ones that are obsolete. I'm checking on the website just to see how many he said were obsolete and whether those numbers are actually included in the calculation for the Gleaner's article. Yeah, so let's hear a little bit more from the minister on this. Right, it's coming. There was a point in time.
There are 210 ventilators in the public health system. And as I said, a full listing of that will be placed on our website. Of that number, 118 are as of the end of that audit in active use, 118. 40 are going through a process of maintenance for one reason or the other. Routine maintenance, taking out of service for maintenance, a very complicated piece of equipment. And in some instances of that 40, some are waiting on parts for servicing. The rest are obsolete. They are not functional. They can't be used. And so there's a process that is involved in getting them out of the system. So in essence, 118 as of the end of that audit are being actively engaged in the public health system. I reiterate what I had said earlier, that this represents the largest number of ventilators that public health has had. And we did benefit from donors. We did benefit from support of the private sector because of COVID. So COVID was an extraordinary period. And as a result, a number of ventilators were added to the process, including the PROMAC program, which was unveiled during the COVID period, which I'll get back to. So I say without fear or favor, and I ask anyone who has alternative knowledge or data, at what other point has public health has in active use as much as 118 ventilators? I know of no other period, and I've done some checks. And if you add the 40, which will come back in operation at some point, either from maintenance or from parts to be replaced, that even adds to a much larger core of ventilators in the system. I know of no ventilators in a box. There were some ventilators that were received as a gift from the Saudi Arabian government, I believe. The CMO can comment more on that were not able to be used because of technical issues. It was not, as I understand it, as is being alleged, as a result of a lack of training. So I want to clear that up and make that very clear. So in summary, as it relates to ventilators. We have ventilators. They are all accounted for. They are in the public health system. They are being utilized to save lives on a daily basis. And there should be no fear by the public that somehow they have gone missing, as is being explicitly or insinuated by the opposition over the last number of days. And in the interest of transparency, given the public interest, we will make that data available on our website.
That's Dr. Tufton at the press conference yesterday. Dr. Dawes, we'd like to speak with you again on this, because I think you did insinuate that some were missing and some were cannibalized. Let us have your thoughts on what you heard yesterday, though those figures have been revised. I really want a little bit more clarity from the minister. So initially he said 210, and I believe Jamelia from TVJ did ask a question for you know, it wasn't as clear as it should be. So he said 210, 118 were in operation, 40 out for maintenance. So when you add 118 to 40, that gives you 158. And 210 being the total, seems as if 52 therefore are obsolete, and these have to be sent back. But he did explain that there's an elaborate process of taking them out and doing whatever accounting needs to be done before they're completely removed from the system. So I'd love to find out whether it is these 52 have been included in the numbers for the Gleaner, or if that is the understanding of the Ministry of Health based on the article by the Gleaner. Yeah. 876926178